Dearest gentle listener, it's Bridgerton time again, so let's dig into Season 4, Part 1 of what I like to call Netflix's live-action remake of Cinderella, because that is clearly what this season and the Julia Quinn book upon which it is based are drawing upon for the main storyline. This is going to be audio only rather than my usual changing visuals, as I've had to turn it around so fast, so feel free to be doing something else while you're listening to me talk. And if you're watching on YouTube Premium or Patreon and see the image on screen transition every so often, that's just so that YouTube knows it's okay to put ads in there. It can't really tell unless you give it an obvious visual cue like that. Okay, let's dig in. In episode 1, we get a quick reintroduction to our main cast of characters at Shea Bridgerton, including Penelope, who has now been outed to everyone as the once anonymous gossip writer Lady Whistledown, and who has a cute baby boy with her husband Colin. Two of the Bridgerton sisters, Francesca and Eloise, are just back from boring Scotland with Francesca's very underwritten husband, John Sterling, where there were apparently so few people to talk to that Eloise resorted to sheep. I thought this was a bit harsh on Scotland, by the way, which I happen to love. There's a throwaway line about Viscount Anthony and Viscountess Kate Bridgerton being in India with their own baby, and no mention whatsoever of Sister Daphne, the Duchess of Hastings, because she's not important to the plot anymore. Someone who is, though, is Benedict Bridgerton, but he's missing too. In this case, though, his family actually give a toss as he's the romantic lead for this season, so his mother Violet hot-foots it across town to confront him at his bachelor pad, where she finds him in bed with one naked lady while another dozes on the couch. Rather incredibly, she asks them where their chaperone is. Oh, Violet, do these two ladies of the night who bulked like vampires when you pulled the curtains really look like the type to have chaperones? Seriously though, I thought it was a bit unfair to write the character of the Dowager Lady Bridgerton as being so stupid. Later on, she has an argument with Benedict about his debauchery, telling him he needs to get married and warning him that he could get one of his lady friends pregnant or harm his health. At this point, I wanted to lean into the screen and tell her not to worry. Unwanted pregnancies don't happen to main characters in Bridgertonland unless there's a guaranteed happy ending. The guys all have magic swimmers that know how to avoid eggs like the plague, and the eggs all scamper back into Fort Ovary the moment any hanky-panky takes place. Violet has nothing to worry about. As for Benedict's health, this was a laughably weak nod to the fact that the entire ton, not just him, should all be awash with syphilis by now, given the way they carry on, but no one ever catches so much as a cold from their paramours. Also, when Benedict tells his mother not to panic because he's careful, what does that mean? There's no reliable contraception in this era except abstinence, and I guarantee Benedict isn't using that. That line just felt ridiculous to me. This is all a lot for Violet to handle, as she's also organising the opening ball of the season, which just happens to be a masquerade. It all goes quite well, though Benedict is 2 hours late after he stopped off at his men's club to get it on with some random bloke who assured him they wouldn't need long to have a good time. Once at the ball, he is forced by his mother to talk to some eligible young ladies, who are all simpering idiots trying to get a proposal out of him, because only main characters have brains, unless they're Violet Bridgerton today. But he is suddenly distracted by a ravishing young lady in a silver dress and mask who is staring at the chandelier like it's a disco ball. This, apparently, is enough to convince Benedict that she is the epitome of intelligence, mystery and charm, and he must have her. Despite this odd behaviour, the fact that she won't tell him her name, doesn't appear to be with anyone, doesn't know how to dance, and doesn't know who he is except from Whistledown's column, Benedict doesn't seem to smell a rat, but let's not be too harsh on him. Maybe he just gets his brains from his mother, the woman who recently asked a hooker where her chaperone was. He and Cinderella have a magical dance lesson alone on the terrace, during which we get a flash of her ludicrous stilettos. The costumes, hair and makeup are as 21st century as ever on this show, so I'm not going to get sidetracked by them, as I discussed this issue in last year's Bridgerton video, which I'll leave linked for you. They also have a little smooch before she runs off when the bell strikes midnight and everyone is expected to remove their masks, leaving behind only a glove and a starstruck Bridgerton. When she gets home, we discover that she's a maid called Sophie working in the household of a very unpleasant woman named Lady Penwood, Scottish actress Katie Lung, who was Harry Potter's girlfriend in another life, and her 2 daughters who were also at the ball. She managed to pull off the whole lady at the ball charade herself with the help of what appear to be the only 2 other servants in this large, well-financed household, and they seem to have helped her and risked their livelihoods and even freedom in doing so, just for kicks. In other storylines, Queen Charlotte is as childish and petulant as ever and has decided that rather than choosing a debutante to promote this season on the marriage market, she's going to choose a man to promote instead, and of course her eyes fall on Benedict. By the by, I cringed when a character introduced her as Her Royal Highness. For a queen, it's Your Majesty, never Your Royal Highness. Someone send a memo to the writers, please. Benedict's sister-in-law, Penelope, Lady Whistledown, is benefiting from a whole suit of plot armour this season as she is now something of a celebrity, rather than the pariah she'd actually be if society found out she'd been publishing their secrets for the past several years, while Lady Danbury, the Queen's best mate, would like a little time off from court intrigue to go travelling and find herself, but Queen Charlotte says no. All 3 of these actresses always nail their characters, and the scene in which Angela Ando, Lady Danbury, talks about how much the Queen's friendship has meant to her and her desire to return to her homeland for the first time since she was 4 was really quite affecting. Golda Rochouvel as the Queen then perfectly undercut the whole thing with her comedic little no at the end of it. These 2 have their buddy act down to a T at this point, and Danbury's character is a great counterpoint to a lot of the other female characters in the show, as she's written as consistently smart and sharp and gets to do more than moon after boys. I do wish we could see some character development for the Queen though. Elsewhere, the youngest Bridgerton daughter, Hyacinth, is chomping at the bit to get out into society, and Violet, Lady Bridgerton, has a gentleman friend who she keeps batting her eyelashes at. This is actually Lady Danbury's brother. Is it just me, by the way, or is she also sporting a lot more cleavage this season? I assumed when watching this that that's to indicate that she's got a romance storyline on the go, and spoiler alert, I wasn't wrong, but you'll need to wait until later in the review to hear how this turns out. Let's just say that it transpires that Violet is quite the hypocrite when it comes to her complaints to Benedict about the proper way to behave. Moving on to episode 2. Lady Danbury is still chafing at the bit to get away from the Queen and is most put out that Charlotte will allow a pregnant lady-in-waiting to leave court, but not her. We also get 2 flashbacks showing us Sophie's story. The mean boss lady named Lady Penwood, who used to date Harry Potter, is actually her stepmother. This is basically Cinderella after all. But Sophie is the illegitimate child of her dead father, who was passed off as his ward, and Lady Penwood didn't even know about the girl until she rocked up at her new hubby's house and was presented with her. It was only the discovery that she was expected to raise her spouse's secret illegitimate offspring that made her so mean, and kudos to Katie Lung, who gets increasingly little screen time in these 4 episodes for actually making her character sympathetic in the moment when she realises that her husband has duped her into being stepmother to his illegitimate daughter, without even mentioning the child's existence to her before their wedding. I know the guy is presented as a good man and wonderful father, and we're clearly meant to like him, but that was actually a really scummy thing to do to both his wife and child. Back in the present day, by which I mean Bridgerton's version of the late 1810s, she's as horrible to Sophie as you would expect from Cinderella's stepmom, and so is her daughter Rosamond, while the other stepsister, Posy, neither of whom are ugly by the way, seems quite nice. Lady Bridgerton is out for a walk with daughter Eloise, trying to get her married off too, though Eloise insists that she's on the shelf and seems quite happy to be there. Benedict shows up to be Eloise's chaperone in place of Violet, but it's all a ruse. He wants his little sister's help to find the mysterious lady from the ball who left behind a glove and stole his heart, all thanks to her love of good lighting. In exchange, he'll help Eloise to avoid Lady Bridgerton's matchmaking. Back home, half of London is visiting Penelope to give her gossip to publish and bring her gifts, and Benedict hopes that his sister-in-law will be able to use her Whistledown magic powers to find Cinderella. Penelope agrees, despite the fact that she has a wager with the Queen that Benedict won't wed this season, and drops a hint in her gossip column that he's looking for a wife. It's aimed at Cinderella/Sophie, of course, but the result is that the next time he takes Eloise promenading, he is beset by a deluge of desperate mamas and their daughters hoping to nab him for themselves. Benedict talks to them, asking what their costumes were at the ball as he tries to find Sophie, but the closest he unwittingly gets is her stepsister Rosamond Lee, who also has her sights set on becoming the next Mrs. Bridgerton. Mama Violet is not happy that Benedict seems to be keeping her out of his great wife hunt, and she gets Penelope to tell her what she knows of his hunt for Cinderella. Violet confronts Benedict about it, and when he shows her the glove Sophie dropped, Violet redeems the dim-witted behaviour from episode 1 by immediately noticing that the inside of the glove has the Penwood coat of arms on it and directing her son to Penwood House. Maybe Benedict's lack of brains comes from elsewhere on his family tree after all. Another flashback to Sophie's childhood shows us that Lady Penwood wouldn't let her take dance lessons with her own daughters, and Sophie asks her father about her dead mother but gets no answers, although we do discover that her necklace was her mystery mum's. Back in the present day, Benedict visits the household to call on the nice stepsister Posy, thinking she might be his missing lady in silver, but the real woman can only look through the doorway. Her fellow servant tries to get her to tell him who she is, but Sophie won't do it. Benedict, she says, wants the lady in silver, and she isn't real. Benedict concludes his awkward tea with Posy, and by his questions and the fact that Lady Penwood sees him with the glove through a window after he leaves, tips her off to the fact that he's after the lady in silver from the ball. Later on, she makes Sophie try on the silver shoes she borrowed for the ball without Lady Penwood knowing, and which Lady Penwood had earlier noticed a dirty mark on. They fit, of course, and Penwood reveals that she knows Sophie went to the ball and is the lady in silver. They get into a huge row about how badly Penwood has treated her stepdaughter over the years, and Penwood fires her and says she'll never work in Mayfair again. After selling some possessions to raise money, Sophie's off on a coach to who knows where. Benedict, meanwhile, is despondent that he can't find his Cinderella, so goes to one of his friend's country houses to hang out and get drunk, because that's what you do when you're sad, right? While there, he rescues a couple of maids from the unwanted attentions of some drunks, and who should one of these women be but Sophie, of course, in a very convenient plot contrivance. She recognises him, but he doesn't know her or recognise her voice. Sophie has now been fired again, by the way, but Benedict says he'll find her a job back in London, and she leaves with him on an open-top trap that he's driving himself for some reason. Gang, I've literally seen pictures of 19th century farmers with fancier wheels than this, and Benedict is meant to be loaded. Another flashback shows us the aftermath of Sophie's father's death, with her stepmother telling her over the grave that her father left her nothing in his will, much to Sophie's horror and disbelief. She also says that Sophie's mother was a maid who became a mistress and not to worry because Lady Penwood will take care of her as long as Sophie works as a maid. Does anyone else think Lady P isn't being entirely truthful about Sophie's background or the father's will and that she needs to keep her around for some reason? Elsewhere, Charlotte and Lady Danbury's relationship goes from bad to worse, as Lady D won't visit the Queen and Her Majesty is very down about it. After an intervention from the Queen's kindly butler, Brimsley, though, Danbury goes back to the royal presence and offers a fake apology to try to smooth things over. They discuss Danbury leaving again, and again Charlotte won't let her go. Danbury is walking out again when Charlotte breaks and apologises to her, asking what will happen to her when the King, George III, dies. In reality, Charlotte died first in 1818, but we're not in reality with this show, so let's just roll with it. In the show, this gives us an insight into Charlotte's character and fears. She doesn't want to be alone, and Danbury is the only close friend she has. If you want to know more about the real Queen Charlotte, by the way, I'll leave my videos about her life and whether or not she was actually mixed race linked below for you. Moving on to episode 3. Benedict and Sophie get caught in a rain shower, so they stop off at his cottage, for Witchreed Mansion, to spend the night. Of course, Benedict, who's nursing an injury, poor thing, from his fight with the bad men at the end of the previous episode, can't get in because he doesn't carry keys to his own house, and the entire servant body seems to be out for the night. You just can't get the help sometimes. Luckily, Sophie isn't above climbing through a window and getting the fire lit. He puts her up in the very swanky guest rooms and retires to his own chamber, where we see that his injury actually looks very serious. By the by, I couldn't help noticing that these scenes are presumably lit by the magical glow of this pair's burgeoning love, as despite no light source beyond one small fire and one even smaller candle, I can see everything in this house, even though it's the middle of the night, in the middle of the countryside, in the middle of a rainstorm, nearly a century before electric lights. Just saying. Anyways, Sophie wakes up to Benedict groaning in pain down the hall and discovers him having some sort of fit and a fever. Luckily, she knows all about cleaning wounds with alcohol and wrapping them up in makeshift bandages. Apparently, Benedict didn't think to do that before he climbed into his snowy white sheets, but it's okay as I don't see any blood on them. And she tucks him back in while Benedict hallucinates about the lady in the silver dress and asks her to kiss him. The next morning, the only two servants he seems to have to run this giant house, Mr. and Mrs. Crabtree, show up to discover a miraculously 85% healed master, maybe this is why no one ever calls him a doctor throughout the episode, and a mystery woman sitting next to his bed in her nightie. Benedict sort of smooths everything over with them, and Sophie is helped into one of his sister's dresses and brought back to his bedroom for breakfast, because of course it was totally normal for young ladies to dine in the bedrooms of their hosts with the other servants too, and despite the fact that he was supposedly at death's door 10 hours earlier. She wants to get to work, but he insists she's a guest and forces her to chill out, so she goes for a walk in the gardens. Later on, the two have a nice chat in the library, where he says she can call him Benedict, and she admires his paintings and shows off her knowledge of art history and French. The two almost have a moment until the butler walks in, and I must say that the two actors have good chemistry together, even if Benedict's transformation from total rake to one-woman man is unrealistically fast and complete. The next day, they have a date out in the garden, flying Benedict's little brother's old kite, and the day after that, he, still recovering from a gruesome stab wound that nearly killed him just a few nights ago, goes for a swim in what I'm sure is a totally unchlorinated lake. I think what we're meant to take from this scene, though, is not that he has an inhuman resistance to infection, but that he has no swimming trunks. And Sophie, who just happens to pass by on her daily walk, another helpful plot contrivance, seems to like what she sees. This scene seemed like an obvious spin on the infamous Darcy and Elizabeth scene in the BBC's 1995 adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, albeit significantly sexed up. But hey, I'm told imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Anyways, after a lingering shot of his naked derriere, Benedict confronts her for watching him. The two make out and then both apologise to each other for it. Now, the way this whole storyline is developing is obviously ludicrous. Sophie would be totally ruined at this point, and virtually no man in Benedict's position would ever look seriously at a maid, not just because of the class difference, but because even if he married her, she'd never be accepted into his upper crust circles, nor would she be able to maintain her links with her own lower class world. Instead, she'd have a miserable life stuck between the two. I think we can all guess, though, that it'll all work out somehow, because this is Bridgerton land. Benedict's housekeeper, Mrs. Crabtree, gives him a stern talking to about his treatment of Sophie, reminding him that as a maid, Sophie really doesn't have a choice in what happens between them because of the power imbalance, and encouraging him to find his mysterious lady in silver, not knowing, of course, that they are one and the same. Side note, as I watched this interaction, I couldn't help but think how familiar all the named servants in this show seem to be with their masters and mistresses. In reality, sticking your nose into your boss's private life like this would get you a one-way ticket to unemployment, poverty, and possibly the workhouse. Anyway, Benedict, despite being smitten with his maid, apologises to her again for the smooching and agrees to take her back to London and find her honest employment. Meanwhile, in the capital, we're told that several months have passed since Sophie was dismissed from Penwood House, and Lady Penwood has been poaching several staff members from other households in the town. This is causing a labour shortage in the great houses, known as the Maids' War. It's wild, isn't it? In London, you need every able-bodied woman around to manage a house for you and your two daughters, yet Benedict can run his huge country pad with only 2 pensioners on the payroll. This very first world problem annoys the Queen because Whistledown is writing about it and Charlotte doesn't find it an interesting topic, being unaware that she herself has 142 maids and butlers, another instance of a character who is meant to be smart being unbelievably unobservant and stupid. We also see the continuation of the storyline that she won't let Lady Danbury leave, leading Danbury to offer to find a new lady-in-waiting for Charlotte who will entertain her, obviously hoping that such a distraction will allow her, Danbury, to get away. At this point, I'm getting a little bored of this storyline. Lady Danbury is acting like she's a slave rather than a free and very wealthy woman who can simply pick up and walk if she chooses to, and that is a particularly unfortunate subtext in a show which is built on the idea that in this alt universe, racial equality has been achieved and there is no such thing as slavery. Furthermore, if anyone remembers back to season 1, the event which supposedly brought about this radical overhaul of British society was Charlotte's marriage to the white King George III, so having her now acting the part of a virtual slave owner whilst calling it friendship is especially grating. Over at the main Bridgerton residence, or Bridgerton Central as I like to call it, Eloise is tricked by her mother into taking her sister Hyacinth to her etiquette lessons, all about how to arrange a seating plan and what kind of plates one should use. Presumably this is set up for a later episode because it goes nowhere in this one. At Penelope's family home, we also finally see Lady Featherington, the so far criminally underused Polly Walker. If you've never seen her in a TV show called Rome that she did in the mid-noughties, go watch it and thank me later. She's viciously good in it. Anyways, Lady Featherington's housekeeper, Mrs. Farley, has been offered a new job, so she uses that to try to negotiate a higher wage. Instead, she gets a gift of 2 heinous hand-me-down dresses from Lady Featherington, who acts like she just gave her the keys to the kingdom and says that money is too tight to do otherwise. She then goes and buys herself a bunch of new dresses and gets called out for her poor behaviour by the housekeeper, who Featherington then basically fires rather than give the woman a pay rise. I guess the maids' war that has everyone else in it isn't that important in the Featherington household. They're throwing good staff away. The former Francesca Bridgerton is concerned that she isn't pregnant yet and seems to be a bit unsatisfied in the marital bed, shall we say, though she doesn't tell her husband John that. Penelope and Colin, meanwhile, are having no such issues. In fact, when we first see them this episode, they're having some fun in the back of their carriage, though really it looks uncomfortable if not downright dangerous. But Bridgerton has to get in its quota of rumpy-pumpy, so this scene made the edit despite the fact that it actually does nothing to progress the plot. Later on, Francesca asks her mother, what exactly does it mean to reach your pinnacle in the bedroom? Cue a very awkward conversation, which makes one long for those hideous sex ed videos you used to get shown in school, because at least they got the information across. The actresses do a great job of making this whole thing very sweet and amusing though. Another awkward conversation with Penelope later, and Francesca is somewhat enlightened as to what she is missing. Last but not least, we get a couple of scenes trying to progress Violet Bridgerton's romantic story, but honestly, this is getting quite lost in the mix as there's just so much going on. I count at least 6 storylines, and it's another one of those unrealistic plot threads where she basically throws herself at her love interest and they have a very indiscreet conversation about what their own bedroom activities might be like before they make out. Remember, this is the woman who is always worried about chaperones, STDs, and propriety. There's definitely some cognitive dissonance here. And so we come to episode 4. Benedict and Sophie arrive back in London where, surprise surprise, he reveals that he is employing her at Bridgerton House, in part because he couldn't get her in anywhere else, obviously the influence of her stepmother at work. Violet doesn't want to hire Sophie, she's heard rumours about the girl too, but when she hears that Sophie saved Benedict's life, she comes right around and agrees that Sophie can be a lady's maid and companion to Eloise and Hyacinth. Sophie settles in, and her old workmate Hazel, who was the other maid attacked alongside Sophie before being rescued by Benedict, randomly shows up, having got a job at Bridgerton House too, for which she credits Sophie's interest with Benedict, earning him Sophie's gratitude. As for Benedict, he wanders around a lot in just his open shirt and is still pursuing the woman in silver despite his obvious interest in Sophie. Violet agrees to help him by gathering up miniatures of all the ladies who were at her masquerade ball, but they get nowhere, and one encounter with Sophie in a hallway where she does his necktie for him, and we can see that he really only has eyes for her. Eloise is still tired of having to join Hyacinth at her etiquette lessons, and I'm tired of watching them, but she gets chatting to Sophie, who is there in her capacity as a companion, I guess, and the two start bonding over a shared love of books. Later, at a dinner at Lady Danbury's, we get a mention of the bet between the Queen and Penelope about whether Benedict would marry this season, and honestly, I'd almost forgotten it existed. Charlotte doesn't seem very interested at all in this year's crop of suitors and debutantes, nor does Penelope, and I don't know why we're wasting time on this will he won't he storyline. It just seems like a desperate way to try to connect these characters to the main action, from which they are actually completely divorced. Also at the party is Alice Mondridge, for reasons which will become clear later. You may remember her from previous seasons as the wife of an ex-boxer who's now become nobility because her son randomly inherited a title last season in a manner that has nothing to do with how titles actually work. I must confess, in the scrum of returning and new characters in this show, I'd actually forgotten who she was when she first appeared on screen, as she was never a major presence in the programme. The Bridgerton sisters gush over how wonderful, smart and well-read their new servant is, causing their mother Violet to smell something fishy, and the next day she brings in Sophie for tea and to pump her for information about her past. Sophie is not very forthcoming, though she does explain that her parents are dead, and Lady Bridgerton offers to let her stay on permanently. Soon after, Sophie and Benedict admire the stars together through a window and talk about whether it's wise for Sophie to take up his mother's offer and stay. They leave each other without really deciding anything, but if Sophie's later solo activities in her bedroom, which is ridiculously luxurious for a servant, are anything to go by, she definitely doesn't want to leave Benedict. At his men's club, her love interest, his brother Colin, and Alice's husband Will Mondridge, who is another character without any real storyline this season, talk about mistresses and the need to marry within one's class. This conversation is going to have some bad repercussions at the end of the episode. Danbury brings in Alice Mondridge as a new lady-in-waiting for the Queen, and now we see why she's been shoehorned into this season. Alice, though, thinks she's there to report that she might have found the lady in silver from the ball, and is very surprised to hear about her new job. She probably senses that Charlotte's not very keen on the idea either. A few days later, she tells Danbury that she doesn't want the position and didn't appreciate being forced into it. Danbury gives her a pep talk, though, about what a great opportunity it is and how perfect she is for the task, and Alice does a complete 180 and accepts. Back to the main storyline. Violet tells Benedict she thinks she's found the mystery woman from the ball, a Miss Hollis, and arranges for her to visit so that Benedict can get a look at her. It's not her, of course, but I find it ridiculous that Benedict didn't know this right off the bat, because the woman he is introduced to is white and the woman he met at a ball was of Asian descent, which was clear despite the mask. Now, Bridgerton doesn't exist in a world where people don't have different skin colours. These differences have been mentioned before. It's just that those differences don't matter anymore. So why on earth is Benedict wasting his time with someone who's clearly not the correct colour to be his missing Cinderella, and did he not tell his mother what skin tone his mystery lady had to help to narrow the search field? This plot point just doesn't make any sense within the context of the show's supposed internal logic. Could they not just have cast a woman of Asian descent to play Miss Hollis? I don't like it when shows treat both the characters and the audience like idiots in this way. Benedict gets distracted when Sophie walks in, and there's an awkward moment when she spills tea on his hand. Miss Hollis then leaves, but not before mentioning that she was never even at the masquerade ball. Sophie comes back to clean up the tea mess, and she and Mr. Bridgerton have another argument about the fact that she really can't stay in her post if Benedict is going to be there all the time, as it is too difficult for her to see him. Benedict agrees to return to his bachelor pad and spend minimal time at Bridgerton House. Sophie advises him to pursue Miss Hollis, and later on his mother advises him to stop chasing his imaginary lady. In other news, little brother Gregory Bridgerton shows up on a visit from Eton in time for his first shave. That's literally his whole storyline for this episode. And in a throwaway line of exposition, we hear that the maid wars from the previous episode are over. That didn't last long. Francesca continues to try to spice up her marriage, and her husband agrees that they can be more expressive with each other, though that falls a bit flat when he realises the next time they're in bed, she's faking it and has never reached her pinnacle. They do at least have an honest conversation about their feelings, though, and he reassures her about how much he loves her. She's not the only Bridgerton lady exploring romance. Violet's sporadic relationship with Lady Danbury's brother, Lord Marcus Anderson, continues throughout the episode, and she conspires to organise a tea date with her gentleman, and tea in this context is standing in for something else entirely, with almost no servants or family present and just the support of her housekeeper. To that end, she encourages Francesca to hold a family dinner from which Violet can then absent herself by feigning illness. Later, she checks out her naked self in a mirror in a scene that seemed totally gratuitous and could definitely have been cut. On the night of this dinner, all the servants at Bridgerton House are dismissed to allow for Violet's secret date, including Sophie, who agrees to go to the tavern with her colleagues. She also tells the housekeeper, Mrs. Wilson, that she's going to stay on at the house. At the dinner at Francesca's house, Eloise offends Hyacinth by showing how little she cares about her sister's interests, life, or feelings. To be fair, Hyacinth, I don't care about them either, or Eloise for that matter. And Francesca's cousin-in-law, Michaela, shows up uninvited and unannounced, driving her own carriage with her driver passed out inside it. Francesca doesn't look amused at the extra guest, and I'm not amused at having to track yet another storyline. Back at Bridgerton House, Violet is prancing around her bedroom in her revealing underwear, expecting Lord Marcus, who shows up for tea in inverted commas, and the two promptly get it on while Mrs. Wilson stands guard. They aren't alone in the house, though. Benedict chooses this moment to show up, having been unable to live without Sophie, while she realises, just as she leaves, that she's forgotten her purse and goes back to get it. They literally run into each other, and with barely a word spoken, they're going at it too, right there on the stairs. He then basically declares his love for her, tells her that she deserves so much better than what she's got, and finishes by making her the most romantic offer his wee brain can think up: to be his mistress. Oh, Benedict, what a letdown. That's not love, and Sophie, this is why maids shouldn't sleep with the master in 19th century England. She's now, of course, in danger of turning into her mother. Disappointed and a little heartbroken, she goes back to her friends to go to the tavern. Throughout the episode, there have been a few hints dropped that new neighbours are moving in, and we close with the discovery that it's Lady Penwood and her daughters. Remember them? I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. They've barely appeared since episode 2. They have also taken on Lady Featherington's ex-housekeeper as their own. Not a huge cliffhanger in my opinion, but that's what we've got, and presumably it's a setup for trouble for Sophie and an attempt to resuscitate the storyline about Penwood's desire to get Benedict to marry one of her daughters. So, final thoughts on this batch of episodes. The acting is as good as ever. The whole thing looks gorgeous, of course, as it always does, and there are some amusing and sweet moments. But there is just so much happening, and some people are getting very little screen time as a result. The Maids' War storyline seemed like a particularly weak addition that only affected other storylines when it was convenient for it to do so, was quickly dropped, and was possibly only included so that we could see a very brief glimpse of Lady Penwood in episode 3, and thus remember that she exists. Eloise and Hyacinth have very little going on as well, and you get the sense that they are just being thrown the odd bone here so that they can appear on screen every so often while we tread water with them, waiting to get to the season where their romantic storylines will take the lead. Even Penelope, Lady Whistledown herself, has no real plot anymore. She's just there to occasionally talk to other people about their plots. This has always been a bit of a problem for Bridgerton. The Julia Quinn books focus on one Bridgerton sibling each, with little in the way of B-plot. Once their storyline is complete, they don't really feature much in other books. The TV show, however, tries to keep characters around who no longer have a role to play, whilst also bringing in new cast members to service each season's main story. Remember in season 2 when the character of Daphne was still wafting about with nothing to do, for instance? Or season 3 when we couldn't quite get rid of Anthony and Kate, who were suffering from the same strain of uselessness. The result of failing to write out such characters is a bloated cast and too many storylines, several of which don't get fleshed out. For the first 3 episodes I thought, thank goodness the youngest Bridgerton, Gregory, has been sent off to Eton this season. But then even he showed up in episode 4 to take up more precious screen time for no apparent reason, and now we've got dreary Francesca's cousin-in-law too. What would I have done differently, I hear you ask? I'd have left Francesca, her husband, and her sister Eloise in Scotland. I'd have sent Hyacinth to join them, and Gregory wouldn't have seen the outside of those school walls until it was time for him to go on his grand tour, which would have happened off-screen. Bang! I'd have wiped out all of their tedious, oxygen-sucking storylines in one fell swoop and freed up more time to service the main plot threads. We'll see though. Maybe they'll get a lot more interesting in the second batch of episodes, and I'll be glad they're there after all. Lastly, I don't appreciate what a hypocrite Lady Bridgerton has now been turned into. By all means, give the woman a romance, but to present her as the paragon of virtue who's worried about what indiscreet behaviour on the part of her son will do to her unwed daughter's marriage prospects, only to then invite some guy round who we really haven't seen her spend that much time with for a quickie while the kids and servants are out, just doesn't feel true to her character as written up to this point. It just doesn't seem to work with the internal logic that the show has previously built. Do I think then that you should watch Bridgerton Season 4? Well, I guess it depends on what you're after. If you want a bit of light-hearted, pretty-looking escapism that bears little resemblance to real history, and you don't mind scrolling on your phone during some of the duller plot threads, then go for it. Personally, though, I'm starting to feel like this is going off the boil a bit, and the plot holes are increasingly big. However, maybe the remaining 4 episodes will change my mind. It's still a fun enough way to pass the time and a guilty pleasure for me, but I think I would only give it 6 out of 10 so far. I think fewer storylines dealt with in more detail would really help it, but it doesn't look like that's the way things are going. We'll see though when the second batch of episodes drop. I hope you enjoyed this review. Please remember to like and hype the video and subscribe with the notification bell on if you haven't already, and maybe check it's still on if you are already subscribed, as people often tell me their notifications are off for no apparent reason. You can get more from me by becoming a YouTube channel member or joining me over on Patreon at patreon.com/historycalling. Or you can join my mailing list on my website, historycallingofficial.com, to get my newsletter and 2 complimentary downloads. Finally, those of you with Irish ancestry might want to check out my book, Find Your Irish Ancestors Online, which is available as an ebook or paperback. All the links you'll need are in the description box and pinned comment. Let me know below if you have or will be watching Bridgerton this year, and remember to check out my other videos about the show and Queen Charlotte. Whatever you choose, please enjoy, and until next time, keep learning.